Welcome back to the podcast. This is another one of our Superman shows. I am welcoming Tom Marvelli onto the show. He is a creator. Tom, tell the fans a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Tom Marvelli. I'm the publisher of Another Door Comics and also the creator and writer of our debut title, The Boy and the Bot, formerly an executive creator at Marvel, as well as a creative director at Hasbro.
When we were discussing this show, you said you wanted to talk about the death of Superman. Why?
So for me, other than the Incredible Hulk, again, growing up in the 70s, the Hulk was the first character that was my gateway into this world, this medium. And obviously we had Wonder Woman, Bionic Man, Woman, what have you. And really when the comic book medium really struck, like to me, its pinnacle of what it can do and what it can be was really the death of Superman in terms of taking this narrative and eventizing it, not with intent to eventize, but the fact that pop culture kind of clamored around this story, this event, and the thing that it became. So it became a really influential story from that point forward in my career and where I wanted to take my career.
As I always put the talking points together for a show, and they're very detailed at times. But when I'm starting to do this death of Superman thing,
Yes.
outside of rereading some of the key issues, I didn't have to do any research. Decades later,
Right.
it's still fresh in my head. Everything that I remember with it was impactful. Everything was there. It was one of the easiest shows to prepare. How do you feel about it when it came out over time? And does actually the storyline still hold up today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see it in all of pop culture now, right? So that we had the death of Superman originally was a pretty much a non-marketed kind of a quiet story. They kind of teased it out. The event happened and everyone chased it from that point, and it became this rally point of all media following what that story was. And just the introduction of Doomsday, how they approached that, how again the culture kind of rallied around it. And we still see that influence today in whether it be like the death of Spider-Man, death of Wolverine. There's always the death of somebody in comics, and we see that even with the films, right? The influence today, because again, our generation that read that comic, they're now the movie makers, they're now the comic writers and what have you. Admiration of that story and the influence of that story into their own body of work. So I still think we see it today for that reason.
Do you think that leading up to death, going to death, and a little bit, don't you think that's one of the best iconic areas of Superman?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then just I love the way that they teased out like the original introduction of Doomsday, right? When it was just that fist kind of pounding on the wall and then slowly peeling back the glove, and we see the hand, and then we see the hand with the bones, the knuckle spikes coming out from the bones, and just that sort of rhythmic kind of build up to this story, which again, at the end of the day, it's a very simplistically written story. It's just this constant build up of tension and stakes getting to that climatic finish. But again, it was all that build up that I think ultimately led to such a great story. And I think that's why people memorized it so well, or it's in people's memories so much, is because really it's just one of those simple stories that just resonates. It's not overly complex in its plot development or anything.
We're talking about a storyline that goes back decades.
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure. Again, I think going back to what I was saying, I think there's a lot of creators that were influenced by those narratives back in the day, and I think they've brought that forward, and it's influencing their own body of work. We're still seeing doomsday stories today. For me, maybe being a traditionalist a little bit, I'm used to or want the original version of that character, and I think people have added other layers to it to find new points of entry for that character. And again, I think they just did a run-up with Doomsday just most recently. But again, for me, he'll always be that primal beast, that full of rage and just wanting to attack. When they start to do some of the other stuff to him, to me, I like the root version of him the best. And even the story that Jurgens did later, telling the origin of the character, I thought was fantastic, giving him that backstory.
Now, we know that the press loves to focus on the negative. The DC film version lately has been getting a lot of dings over the past few years, but I don't think fans realize, and you would have a better knowledge because of your background, but I don't think that fans realize that when DC became part of Warner Brothers Discovery and David Zaslav, it was for the first time in a long time where the higher ups seem to care about DC Comics actively. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think what they saw was unmined potential in its material, right? I think when you saw what Marvel was doing. Now, again, you can go back to the Donner, Superman, what have you. There was always some variation on film, whether it be on theaters or television, what have you. But I think Marvel really showed its truer potential for taking that medium, that format, and how to distribute that to a wider audience through film and theater and just that connective tissue storytelling. And I think a lot of studios were doing it. They were looking at what, I hate to use the word IP, but they were all looking at what do we have in our vault that we can do this with. We saw Disney try even pre-acquisition, try to do that with Tron. And obviously they're doing another movie of that. And then Warner Brothers bringing out their character, rogues of characters and so on. And to me, I think Marvel had a lot of influence in where these executives were like, hey, what do we have in our vault?
After the last merger, we had the dawn of DC initiative started. And to me, it felt like a light switch was turned on, and you saw significant changes across all of DC.
I think what we saw with the dawn of DC was really them kind of getting back to basics, bringing those characters, bringing them forward, showing up in their true forms, and having people remember why they fell in love with these characters in the first place. So you had Superman in his red trunks, you had Batman in his true. It was like a reset of saying, hey, this thing that you remember as a child, we have this, and here it is. So they're representing it in its true form again. Because again, as years go by, decades of storytelling, the characters can veer off and always come back. But I think it was really a good reset to get the masses back, taking a harder look at their characters.
I don't think I've seen things so tight with the Superman mythos and Superman so really good and tight with everything since the
Mhm.
Triangle era. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, the Triangle Era was interesting because again, it told that linear story and it had that kind of raise all ships kind of momentum to them, right? So every title mattered, and you wanted to read every single title as those through lines of those narratives. And so as a reader at that time, especially as a young kid, I loved all of that. As an adult, with having to pay for all of that, because that's a lot of titles, that's a lot of financial commitment to those narratives. But I did love that type of storytelling and seeing how the different artists would interpret the character in a linear way.
We're not doing necessarily a review of the death of Superman, but more of an overview.
Right.
And don't you think fans are missing out when they don't look behind the curtain or between the pages of how some of these things came about? To me, as a longtime fan, I could be in the minority, but looking at how some of this stuff came about makes me appreciate what happened and what Death to Superman was about, and even what's
Sure.
going on with Superman today. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, for me, I like to learn like behind the scenes, the inside baseball of it all after I've read the material and it's already published. I think the surprise and delight of it all, when we talk about readership, as a reader, I want to be surprised, right? I want to see where this story is taking me. I think we've lost a little bit of that when we look at like how solicitations are done and so forth. Like, if the death of Superman were done today, they would have announced that 6, 7, maybe a year prior to it coming out. And I think it would have lost some of its surprise, some of its luster from a reader perspective. They may have had more buy-in early, they may have sold more copies up front, but just again, it's like movies, right? It's like when a trailer shows you the whole film before you go see the film, it takes away some of that spark. And I think somebody who's done it in the indie space, really well was like Robert Kirkman, right? When he did the death of Rick in The Walking Dead, that wasn't announced, that wasn't a big fanfare rally around that. He just did it as part of his narrative, and it was a great surprise, right? And then he talked about the surprise after the fact. And I think that's the better method for this type of narrative because again, it's marketing versus creative in that sense. Because marketing, you do lose some of that surprise and delight for the audience.
We're talking about the Triangle era, and what it was that DC had four Superman titles by four different creative teams, and they had their own little things going on. But in the
Right.
corner, you would have one, two, three, four, five, so you could follow the reading order. But to me, it was like this best kept secret of such tight stories, start great writers, great artists, and I don't think
Right.
it got its fair share. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. To me, it was one of those things where again, it had a level of talent and writers, creators, Jurgens, Bogdanov, the whole crew, and they were doing some of their best work. And yeah, I mean, there was some fanfare in other places, but when the death came, it was like, hey, look what we have going on here. And I think they rode that wave for quite a long time after because it was so influential.
Because Superman sales in the
Mhm.
back then were middle of the road. And again, like this being the summer of Superman, the Superman movie, everything's all kind of synced up and everybody's on the same page with the marketing. Death, it wasn't necessarily so. They're like, we need this filler thing in. And just
Right.
by a fluke of nature, it was a slow news day in the world.
Right.
Literally, it was a
Yep.
slow news day. And all the press automatically picked this up. And all of
Right.
a sudden, you had this huge domino effect, this
Right.
snowball going down the hill that DC was caught unprepared. And
Right.
so then the marketing people came in with all these gimmicks. You remember the bagged issues of Superman
Right.
with the black armband.
Uh-huh.
This is like a tipping point where comic books turned into something that you read, loved as a fan, to something that was more like a collector's thing and a speculator market. And let's buy this so we can fund our kids' education.
Exactly. And I think that, yeah, exactly to your point earlier, it did catch him by surprise, but I think there was a double-edged sword to that because we as comic book readers, people have been following these stories for many years. We know death is not final in comics, right? We've seen it for ages, right? And sometimes there's some like the holy grail of those, like Uncle Ben won't come back, or maybe he will someday, but there's some that they say tried and true to, but by and large, they come back. And well, wait, it's the number one character of all time, Superman. Of course, he's going to come back. We as readers know that, and we just enjoy the journey on how they get there. But the masses who are watching it on the news or reading it in their local paper, they don't think that. They're thinking like, "Oh, death in the real world, it's finite."
As a
Right,
fan, when you're looking at all this media press and people going crazy, then in your back of your
yeah,
mind, you go, suckers.
right, correct. And it's so there was that whole sort of wow, they're really killing this character. There's never going to be a Superman ever again. Sort of there was that fear of missing out thing going on where everyone just clamored and wanted to buy that book and get it exactly for that speculator component, saying, wow, this is the last Superman book ever. And again, the downside of that was when he came back, people were like, oh, they felt burned. And not the comic book reader, but those mass audience people, those speculators felt, like, wait a minute, I invested X, Y, and Z in this, and now he's back. And not understanding again how the medium really operates. But again, so I think that was where people got a little disenfranchised with the idea that he came back and they felt burned by that. And that's why I think a lot of even today, when we talk about the death of characters, there's a little bit of eye rolling that goes on with those because we know that they kill a character. He's going to be back in a few months later, a few issues, maybe a year later, whatever the narrative requires. But so I don't think it has that same weight. Like, I don't think they can go back to that well from a marketing standpoint and get those bigger numbers again because of people feeling jaded by the fact that he did come back. Going into that, like I say, probably coming from the world of Marvel, I would say like the Captain America, the death of Captain America as a byproduct of that awesome Civil War story that Miller did, like that felt like a natural, organic way of doing the story. It wasn't a marketing stunt. It was just you need a really good, solid conclusion, and that's where it netted out. And we were in that same place where it was a slow news day, and we captured a little bit of outside the realm buzz, but it wasn't nowhere near the death of Superman in the sense that everyone knows he's going to come back. It's just how. So again, I think that was a once in a lifetime lightning in a bottle kind of scenario with that kind of format of storytelling.
I don't think I can remember another comic book event that just really caught on like wildfire. Lightning in a bottle because it just happened. You remember this. We've got hologram covers. We have
Right,
all
right,
these really strange little things to boost that speculator market. And what
right.
happened a few years ago, the whole industry collapsed.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's when it dipped a little bit. It was around that time because, again, it was that same scenario where it's like people didn't realize that was a really good three-act structure, right? The death was really only act one. The real heart of the story was World Without Superman, that second one, right? That was the heart of it. And then the return was that what does the world look like when he's not there so that when he does come back, there's this greater impact in the storytelling. And but again, we as comic readers super appreciated all of that, but the mass audience felt a little burned by that. That's why that white cover that came out years later didn't do nearly as well because by then everyone that was speculating was jaded by it.
Today in 2025, this being the summer of Superman for one thing, DC seems more interested in telling good stories.
I think to me the larger challenge as a whole for the comic community is finding and getting that younger demographic, that younger reader to engage with the material. I think to me that's the biggest challenge. We see the older fans in the direct market and going into the specialty stores, what have you. In the book markets, like your Barnes and Noble, you have your adult, primarily men reading the graphic novels for that. And then you have the younger audience, younger kids reading manga. And there's clearly an appetite to read the format and the medium. It's just how do you get that audience that's doing the reading the manga stuff to come over and read the American comics. I think whoever finds the solution to that wins the day.
We are talking about how the Doomsday Saga unraveled over several issues and ended in Superman 75 with
Right.
Dan Jurgens is writing it.
Hmm?
And I thought it was brilliant because the whole issue is nothing but splash pages.
Correct. Yeah. And that's what I mean. If you look back at the entire story, it was almost like a visual countdown that took place, right? So they started with sometimes a 6-5 panel structure. Then it went down to 5 panels in one book, then 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. And obviously it was very intentional. And by the time we get to Jurgens, that last one where it's all splashes, I think it's really important that the writer was also illustrating that book because every splash needs to have all the key elements in that one visual to help move that narrative forward. And I think that'd be a lot tougher, doable, but a lot tougher if it's two people trying to work through that versus the one person trying to set up those shots.
Before we wrap this up, what is your final thoughts about the death of Superman, especially for newer fans?
For me, it's like I look at what they accomplished and how much that has really impacted stuff. And for me, I really can't wait for there's an absolute edition that's coming out soon. And again, I'm somebody who buys all formats of this book specifically. So I have the trades, I have all the hardcovers, the deluxe hardcovers. I'm really looking forward to the absolute edition. And I'm hoping, because I really love that new format, which is the compact comics that they've been doing. And I would love for them to turn this story into a compact comic. I was actually surprised that they didn't, since it's going to be the summer of Superman, that this one wasn't going to be in that format, but I'll take the absolute for sure. So for me, it's all about getting those formats. And as somebody, literally, my wedding song was the John Williams Superman song. To me, that's the biggest thing I'm looking forward to is re-engaging with that larger scale format. Another thing I'd be curious to see, and I think about it sometimes, is like, what would that story look like if they did some modern coloring to it? Would it help it? Would it enhance it in some
How
way?
much would it
Would
change it?
obviously the storytelling and those aesthetics are very much of its time in a good way. So would modern coloring help it or hinder it in some way? I'd be curious just to see what that would look like. But anyway, we'll see. But those are the things that I'm looking forward to for sure.
Tom Marvelli, thank you for joining me talking about the death of Superman. Thanks again.
Thank you.